with the ability for the Chargers to begin signing some of their pending restricted and unrestricted free agents here in the coming weeks, I think it's time that we start preparing for the offseason. And of course, that first step is always free agency. So if you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. It truly means the world to me. But let's not waste any more of your time. Let's go and get right into things with so much to talk about in this offseason. I figure why not start with the very first thing, and that's going to be talking about the internal free agents for the LA Chargers, going through all of the players along the way and who I think will likely be kept and who will be let go, and the reasons for said, all of that occurring. Now, on February 21st is when the Chargers will be able to, get these contracts signed for some of their restricted and unrestricted free agents, just a few weeks before actual free agency does begin. So, with all that's going on, and, the cap and everything going on, the Chargers are a little bit in a tough situation. On January 30th, the cap rose for the entirety of the NFL, getting moved to $224.8 million, but the Chargers are still about $20 million over the cap. And what that means is, for one, you got to move some players around on your current roster to get yourself under the cap to legally, just be legal as a team next year. Not only that, but you also got to find some space for the free agents you want to bring back, as well as some draft picks that you are going to be using, and you're going to need money to bring those players in as well. The Chargers are in a big-time sticky situation, and as mentioned, being $20 million over, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So before we talk about the current internal free agents, we need to talk a little bit about what the Chargers need to do to get under the cap. So I'm going to cover this really quick. The director, who is another Chargers content creator, I'm sure all of you know him if you're watching me, did a lot more in-depth cap conversation on his channel. Feel free to check that out after this video ends. I'm going to cover it real quick. So the first step in kind of getting yourself in a good position related to the cap is going to be restructuring current players' contracts. And what that kind of means is you're going to move money off the books from this current year, and you're going to move it to later years along the road for said player's contract. And you could also put it after the player's contract ends and just stack it on top. So say you're moving like $6 million off of, say, Joey Bosa's contract. You would break that down through the remainder of his contract, $3 million each year. You get extra $6 million towards the books. Now, that's kind of what restructuring does. Now, I will say I don't fully understand restructuring. It is very confusing how teams that are so far over, like the Saints, the Chiefs, are constantly in problems, keep all of their players on the team and just restructure, and how it continually works out year after year. I'm not sure how it fully works, so I'm not going to try to explain it all. But I do want to cover some players that likely could see a restructure to get the Chargers back in position. Now, I don't think you're going to move all $20 million that's over the cap through restructures, because you have a big-time contract in Justin Herbert coming up soon. But I could see a player such as Joey Bosa or as Keenan Allen right here get moved and have their contract a little bit restructured to get some more money off the books. Potentially, you could also see a guy like J.C. Jackson, Khalil Mack, potentially even Austin Eckler. Those are some options here. I'm not sure when Austin Eckler's contract actually ends, so maybe you can't do with his. But those are some guys where potentially you move some money off the books this year and deal with the consequences in later years. Now, you're only doing this if, for one, you think the player is going to be with you long term, because you're going to pay them one way or another. So if they're with you long term, you move some money off the books now, deal with it later. Hopefully the contract rises, or the cap rises, so you don't have to deal with such a big issue. Or you're doing it with a player who you, like I said, expect to stay with the team long, or is performing at an exceptionally high level, and you expect them to maintain such a high level. Those are about the two ways that you're going to be going about restructuring someone's contract. Now, the next option to free up some space, which is going to happen, sadly, is going to be cutting some players. Now, there's some big-time players that you could be cutting, some important players, or some players that you don't necessarily need. I'm going to be covering some of the bigger names, not going through all the smaller names. But, of course, you need $20 million. You're going to have to cut some players here and there. You're not going to be able to restructure everything and have enough money to bring players back. Some potential players to cut, and a lot of these could upset some fans. Some potential players that you could be cutting. For one, is Gerald Everett. As you see above me, he had a pretty good year, pretty solid year for the Chargers last year, and he's been improving every year he's been in the league, and I do expect him to get better and potentially could even break into somewhere around a Pro Bowl level tight end. But due to his current cap hit, he could shave off some extra millions for this team. I'm not going to be running through exact numbers for each player. I think Everett's about $6 million, but there's a lot of things that could be going on there. You could also see, and likely will see, Matt Filer cut from this team due to the fact that you have Jamari Sawyer and potentially the remainder of the line. Maybe you go draft a guy, stuff like that, but you don't really need Filer unless you're moving Jamari to right tackle and letting Pipkins go. That's about the only situation where you're going to need a guy like Filer to stick around, especially for what his cap hit does bring to this roster. Give me 1 second here, guys. Sorry, just had to wipe something. Another option here, which is one that I don't really like, but has been rumored for the Chargers, especially from Daniel Poppers, is potentially Keenan Allen. Now, I think this is one of the worst options, but it would clear a lot of cap, whether it's a trade or a cut. It could provide you a lot of space. It is one option, but I don't like it at all. And then you also have Dustin Hopkins, who I think will likely be cut because you have Cameron Dicker, who will fill his spot. You also have Larry Roundtree. I feel like the Chargers might go draft another running back. You already have Joshua Kelly, Austin Eckler, Isaiah Spiller. You went draft heavy on running backs lately, but I think they might do it again. You don't really need Larry Roundtree. I could see him being cut, whether he's on the practice squad or off the team. Not sure. That's another option as well. And the final guy, maybe a little bit of surprise that could be cut, is Michael Davis. Now, Michael Davis had a great year last year and kind of overplayed what his contract's looking like as of late. But the fact is, you have J.C. Jackson returning, hopefully, at the start of the year or in the middle. You have Asante Samuel Jr., who looked great. And you have a couple other options here that you could move with. I like Davis. I don't really think they're going to cut him, but it's a potential option if you really need the cap and you like the remainder of the guys and you don't want to cut them. Those are some other options here. Now, there are other players, as mentioned, that are going to make less money that could be, cut as well to free up some cap space along the way. But I just want to do a quick summary of how you're going to find your way under the cap before we cover all of the coming up free agents and whether I think they're going to be able to, want to, or will let them walk. So let's go over all of the restricted as well as unrestricted free agents and mostly the big names. I'm not going to go over some of the smaller ones because you can work in guys that are making under $1 million pretty easily along your cap. You'll make that work. So we're going to be covering some of the bigger names here. I'll take a drink real quick. So the important names to watch for Chargers free agency for internal free agents. One, you're going to have Kyle Van Noy, Bryce Callahan, Morgan Fox, Nasir Adderley, DeAndre Carter, J.K. Scott, Jalen Guyton, Trey Pipkins, Drew Tranquill, Cameron Dicker, and Donald Parham. Those are all of the bigger free agency names. And we're going to go a lot more depth with each individual player, but I wanted a little bit of a brief overview. That's a pretty big chunk of guys here. I mean, you got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 guys that I would say are decently important for the success of this team, and you're not going to be able to keep all of them. So let's go through player by player and talk about what they bring to the team and why or why not they would remain with this team. So let's first start with Drew Tranquill. Drew Tranquill took a huge step up last year. I mean, he had an incredible year, nearly a Pro Bowler. He was getting Pro Bowl votes. He had a great year, and it sadly seems that the Chargers consistently don't feel a need for linebacker. I mean, you just watched Kaiser White, who had a great year 2 years ago, walk and go to the current Eagles that are about to be in the Super Bowl. Now you're looking at Drew Tranquill, who's in a similar spot. I think he's honestly a little bit better than Kaiser White was. And he's in a really good spot. He earned his spot. He earned the money that he's likely going to be getting. But I just don't know if the Chargers are going to be willing to pay him. Whether he is willing to take a team-friendly deal or not, I don't know if they're going to be willing to fork over that $4, $5, $6 million to keep a guy like Drew Tranquill, because they've shown that they can take other linebackers and fill a spot pretty effectively. I mean, last year it was a big question. Everyone thought we had to go draft a linebacker in like round 1 or round 2. Instead, Drew Tranquill nearly became a Pro Bowler. Maybe they think that they can do that again with a guy like Kenneth Murray or some other guys later on in the roster itself, or even draft a guy. So I honestly think they're going to move on from Drew Tranquill. Am I a fan of it? No, I like Drew Tranquill a lot. He brought a lot to this team, and he probably was like the second most important player on the defense for most of the year. Maybe third, other than Khalil Mack and Derwin James. But he was a big part of this defense. I'm not sure if they're going to keep him because they've already shown an ability to move on from linebackers very quickly. So I really don't think they're going to keep Drew Tranquill, and I think they're likely going to try to fill that spot with a guy like in the draft. I think that's likely the most likely scenario is they're going to fill Drew Tranquill's spot through the draft, maybe use Kenneth Murray. Hopefully he steps up a little bit. But I'm not sure that they're going to keep a guy like Drew because they've already shown an ability to move on from the linebacker spot, and especially with a lot of other guys. And I think that the Chargers might find their offense a little bit more important, especially protecting Justin Herbert. Speaking of protecting Justin Herbert, the next guy is going to be Trey Pipkins. Now, speaking of a big-time jump and improving a bunch, Trey Pipkins did exactly that. He went from should he start or should Storm Norton start to guaranteeing his spot and everyone being like, we need Trey Pipkins out there. He was an incredible right tackle for the Chargers last year. Maybe not elite level, but definitely a massive improvement what they've had through the past few years here. And the only issue here is he could cost a little bit more than some of your other free agents. I mean, I think his baseline is going to be somewhere from 6 to 8, but I wouldn't be too surprised if a team's going to be willing to spend close to $10 million on Trey Pipkins. And I don't see any world where the Chargers are going to match that number. $10 million for the right tackle when you have, shown an ability to do good drafting linemen in the draft. I mean, you just got Jamari Salyer, Zion Johnson, Rashawn Slater. You've done a great job showing you can draft linemen that are very good. If someone's willing to pay Trey Pipkins, I could see him getting moved on. But I really have a feeling that if he's not expecting too much, Pipkins will likely get re-signed by this team. They need some familiarity for Justin Herbert, who is once again getting another brand new offensive coordinator, his third in his career in the NFL alone. I think they're going to want to bring as much familiarity in his offense, especially in his offensive line. So I really am leaning towards the fact that they're going to keep Trey Pipkins, and I think if he can improve a little bit more, he's shown a great ability to improve now, he could become a very, very good, maybe not quite elite, but very, very good right tackle for this team. And if you can get him on the lower end, I see no reason why you'd move on from a guy like Trey Pipkins. The next guy here is going to be Kyle Van Noy. Now, we brought him in to be a great veteran talent on this team, and he really showed it, and especially with Joey Bosa's absence, he did a great job at filling a need and doing it very, very good. He ended the year with like 5 or 6 straight games with a sack. Very, very good numbers. But the problem is, although Kyle Van Noy said he would like to retire as a Charger, I think he outplayed his contract. I think he's going to get paid well above what it was when he entered this year, and I don't see the Chargers going to be able to, match that amount with keeping the remainder of some of the other options that they're going to want through free agency, especially in going after the guys in the draft. I don't see Kyle Van Noy returning, and that sucks because he was doing very, very good for the team, and he looked very, very good towards the end of the year. But I think he's going to get paid a little bit too high for what the Chargers are going to be willing to and be available to pay Kyle Van Noy. So I do think Van Noy is going to be moved off of this team. Next up is going to be Bryce Callahan. Similar to Kyle Van Noy, he was brought in last year as a free agent and had a big impact. Bryce Callahan was probably my favorite free agent pickup from last year. He looked great and he worked very, very good for this team, and he locked down a lot of important players through games. And although he was a great pickup last year, you have so many cornerbacks that I just don't know if you're going to be willing to pay him what he's going to be expecting to fill a need that you really don't have. J.C. Jackson, like I said earlier when talking about Michael Davis, if J.C. Jackson returns, he's your cornerback one most likely, and he is a elite level cornerback when healthy. We never really saw him playing healthy last year, but if he can return to full health, he is a star at cornerback. Michael Davis showed that he can play at the cornerback one level and really stepped it back up and showed why he got paid a couple of years back. And Asante Samuel Jr. is also cornerback one capable. You have 3 corners who could be starting corners on other teams. I don't know if you need another one in Bryce Callahan. Maybe he's not cornerback 1 caliber, but he's definitely like cornerback 2 caliber on another team. I don't think you're keeping him for what he's expecting unless it's cheap to be your cornerback 4 or even 3 while J.C. Jackson is recovering from his injury. I just don't see Bryce returning, and although that sucks, I don't think they're going to be willing to spend that money. Instead, they're going to likely lean on, improving internal talent such as like Ja'Sir Taylor, or they're going to go after another guy in the draft. As we know, Brandon Staley really loves going after guys that can kind of play multiple positions. I think we'll see that again in the draft this year. So I don't think they're going to bring back Bryce Callahan, as much as I don't really like that. Now, Morgan Fox, again, another free agent that was brought in last year on a 1-year contract, and he had a really, really good performance, especially with the absence of Joey Bosa, and I think he's going to be needing a little bit less money than some of these other options here. He did a great job at pass rush, especially when Bosa was gone, and also did pretty solid in the run defense. Morgan Fox, I'm not so sure on. He became kind of a fan favorite over these past year here. I'm not sure what number of, dollars he's going to be expecting. That's going to kind of be the tiebreaker here. Who do the Chargers see as more important, and will they have leftover money to bring in Fox? I kind of think that they might keep Fox for an interior D-line, and he kind of works off the edge too as well. I think they could keep him. I'm just not so sure, so that could kind of go either way. Next, we're going to have both Cameron Dicker and J.K. Scott in the same slide because they're both really, really important. You have your punter and your kicker, and these guys both brought really good things for this team. Of course, Cameron Dicker the kicker, was brought in after the Dustin Hopkins injury, and he did a great job, only missing 2 field goals for the entire year, and it was a huge part of turning around the special teams. I think they're going to keep him. And J.K. Scott, a guy who allowed like 50 total punt return yards, a number that the Chargers haven't seen for a long time, gives you a ton of air time so that you're not allowing big-time returns. I also think that J.K. Scott is going to be kept. I see no reason to allow either one of these guys to go unless you really see a better option in the draft, but I just don't at this current moment. So I think both these guys, J.K. Scott and Cameron Dicker, are likely going to be kept. Now, next up, we're going to have Jalen Guyton, a speed guy that Justin Herbert really liked but missed a big portion of last year due to an injury. We don't know how he's going to be when he returns from injury. Will he immediately be back to 100% and be able to be that speed guy for you or not? I'm just not sure, and I think that's enough, especially with the fact that there's going to be other teams that want a speed guy and maybe don't have the draft capital to get one of their favorites. Guyton already showed some experience, showed what he can do. I think another team might be willing to pay him, and I don't think the Chargers are going to be willing to pay him. I don't see Guyton sticking around, especially if the Chargers plan on getting a speed guy in the draft, whether that's round 1 or round 2. I don't see Guyton staying, and along with that, you also have DeAndre Carter. Now, Carter was a big-time performer in the return game. He brings you a little bit of speed, not a ton of it, but I'm not so sure. He was a big part of this offense while you had Keenan Allen and Mike Williams out. Huge part of getting some things rolling. But I'm not sure how much money he's going to be expecting, nor, once again, are you going to need him if you're going after a wide receiver in the draft. I could see Carter getting kept on this team, a lot more likely than Guyton being kept on this team, but I'm not sure. It's all going to depend on that money and who you're willing to pay. He, once again, is a little bit iffy on whether or not he will be staying. Next one I think is a little bit more definitive, and that's going to be Nasir Adderley, safety, opposite of course, Derwin James. He just hasn't shown you enough since you've drafted him. And although he's pretty decent in coverage, although he's blown a few at times through this year, he just hasn't shown you enough. And Alohi Gilman, sitting right behind him, showed good ability when he was given the opportunity during the regular season. And it seems like you also might be drafting, from some of the reports, you might be drafting another safety. I don't think you're going to be keeping Nas Adderley, no matter what number he's looking for, whether that's $2 to $4 million. I think he's going to be somewhere in the middle of that. I don't see you keeping Nas Adderley unless, for some reason, he's taking a minimum, but I don't see that happening. I have a feeling he's going to be a guy like, Adrian Phillips that just randomly gets snagged out of nowhere for more than expected. I don't see the Chargers keeping Nas Adderley on the roster. And lastly is going to be Donald Parham. Now, this is a little bit questionable, and there's a lot more question marks about this guy than anyone else on the team, and I could really see it going both ways, although I do think the Chargers are going to keep Parham. But let me explain myself. Everett, whether he stays with the team or not, is going to be a pretty big factor in whether Parham does. But I think the biggest thing is he's been dealing with a lot of injuries. Parham has been in and out, whether that's concussion, leg injuries. So much stuff has kind of gone wrong for Parham. But when he is playing, he's shown great talent. He's shown what he can do. And you see a lot of potential in him. From his size, his hands, there's a lot of potential. Are you going to be willing to pay him? And I think he's probably going to be willing to take a prove-it deal, a minimum deal, a little bit above that, to prove that he can stay healthy and play well. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. I kind of think that Parham's going to stay on the roster, but I'm not exactly sure. It's going to depend a little bit more on Everett and if you're going to be going out and drafting a tight end. But with minimal money, I mean, you're already $20 million over the cap. A lot of configuring to do and figuring all this stuff out. Although we've grown to love a lot of these players, I don't think we're going to be able to keep as many of them as us Chargers fans would like to keep. But what do you guys think about all this? Who do you want to see the Chargers keep, and who would you be okay with them letting go? How do you think they will fill those needs? I think drafting is going to be a big part of that because they're just not going to have enough money to pick somebody else in outside free agency. So I think a draft is going to be a big part in filling the needs that are lost during this free agency cycle. What do you guys think about all this? If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. It truly means the world to me. But as always, I hope you taught something today. Hope it made you smile. Hope it made you laugh. Something really important to me. Affects someone's day in a great way because every single day can be a great day if you all just put in the effort. And as always, you guys all be safe out there.